American people want this. And I think if we ever actually, and I don't think it's good for the country. So I'll wrap on that.
Okay, so let's move on.
I love Coleman Hughes. He's so good. He's like, all right, you had your little rant. Let's move on.
So this other idea of Ron Paul's is that the economy and the military are linked, right? The economic problems we experience, the inflation, the debt, and so forth, is linked to military spending. Now, my question here is, obviously that story was true of World War II and Vietnam, and you can just look at the numbers, look at the inflation that happens as a direct result of money printing for wars. But in the past 40, 50 years, right, Reagan, he expands the military budget, and inflation goes down. We fight these wars in the Middle East starting in 2001 through the financial crisis. Inflation is in normal rates. It's at between 1% and 3%. This story that I think you believe, and Ron Paul certainly believes, seems like a true critique that is 50 years out of date. And I don't blame Ron Paul for that, because he's of the age where he would have opinions that are 50 years out of date. But
you on the
what's
other
going
hand.
on with you?
Yeah.
You knucklehead?
But what do you find compelling about this idea?
Well, I don't think that it's out of date at all. I think it completely applies. It applies even better to the last 20 years. There's a real problem with measuring inflation by the CPI. And I think even today, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, but if you were taking if you were trying to get your Series 7 or your Series 63 license to go sell stocks and bonds, and they asked you on the test for your license, is inflation if it was a multiple choice and they were inflation is rising prices, you will get that wrong. That's not what inflation is. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. It's more money chasing fewer goods. And so if you want to measure, say, the prices going up.
I fucking hate whenever anyone talks about economics, because more money chasing fewer goods. Well, productivity's up. The reason why they increase the money supply is because it's more money chasing more goods. That's how you keep price stability, you dumbass.
Well, first of all, he just said inflation isn't the rise in prices. It's more money chasing after fewer goods.
Well, it's price inflation. There's monetary inflation and price inflation. People conflate the two. So
right, because generally when people talk about inflation, they're talking about price exclusively about price inflation.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody thinks about monetary inflation, but monetarists.
Yes. Now a lot of the reason for price inflation is, as he said, more money chasing fewer goods. That's that is the reason. But to define it as
causes price inflation.
Yes, that's what causes it. But to define it as such, in order to make this sort of, I would say, very Weasley argument where Coleman says, well, wait a minute. How can you say that all this all this military spending causes inflation when here's all this military spending that hasn't caused it? And then he says, well, that's because I'm redefining inflation away from
inflation.
From price inflation. It's like, okay, well then wait a minute. That's insane, because you're basically redefining the term inflation just so that you can automatically win an argument. Because then you say, well, yeah, prices didn't go up, i.e. price inflation, the thing people cares about, but the money supply increased. So I'm just going to redefine inflation to be the price, the money supply increasing, even if it has no detrimental effects whatsoever.
He's not really redefining it. Monetary inflation is a concept in economics. And I think monetary inflation came before price inflation, but I'm not super sure about that. They definitely work in tandem. The only thing that I'm objecting to here is the fact that he's saying there's this thing called monetary inflation, printing money, the money supply getting bigger. And obviously he's saying that leads to price inflation, but it doesn't necessarily, because he tricks you when he says it's more money chasing fewer goods, when the real situation is it's more money chasing more goods. The reason why we have monetary inflation is to gain price stability, to avoid price deflation. Which, and look, a lot of people want to argue about price deflation, but it's so simple, okay? If you can buy something cheaper tomorrow than today, Sitch, you are stupid. literally retarded if you buy it
Right.
today, right?
Right.
Wait till tomorrow. Well, capitalism runs on sales. And if everybody's waiting till tomorrow because it's always going to be cheaper till tomorrow, what's going to happen? Nobody's going to
And no
buy
one's gonna
shit.
buy anything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So price deflation is a problem, is a huge problem. I mean, we get into cycles. I mean, the housing crash was a price deflationary incident with housing. And nobody
Mhm.
wanted to buy houses because everyone's like, where's the bottom? Where's the bottom? I don't want to buy today. I want
Right.
to wait for the bottom.
The problem with that is that there's just, like with anything else, there's a lot of factors going into it. So like, for example, if you raise the minimum wage in a state and unemployment goes down, that doesn't prove that raising the minimum wage lowers unemployment, because it might be that 3 new factories came and opened up in your state, and that's why employment went down. So there's lots of factors leading into why prices go up or prices go down. But the point is, it's still inflationary. So like, in other words, right, if let's say you had an economy where
Supply and demand is still king for prices. Like, sure, you could have a bunch of changes in the supply prices, so you're forced to raise your prices of the commodity. But at some point, demand is going to fall off. Like, you're going to raise your price where demand falls to a point where it's just not profitable to even make the thing anymore. So
Mhm.
that is the chief metric.
you were about to go through a steep recession and prices were going to drop by 50%. There was going to be a massive deflationary event. And then the government just like doubled or tripled the money supply. And so prices didn't change at all. Now, you could sit there and say the CPI didn't change at all.
I get that it's
but
multi-causal.
But that infusion of cash still created a huge amount of inflation there. So no, it's not a
Monetary inflation. It'd be easier if you just said monetary inflation.
Well, no, he means price inflation now.
No, he means monetary
No,
inflation.
no. He means price inflation, because basically what he's saying is that, well, if it was, because Coleman says his argument is you can't say that all this military spending has caused inflation because we look at the numbers and it literally hasn't. And then he
Right.
says, yeah, but if it wasn't for the military spending, all those prices would have gone down. They would have been deflated.
Right.
So actually, it did cause inflation. You just can't see it.
Oh, because it's price stability. I
Right.
get it.
Now,
Yeah.
it's interesting that he makes this argument, because later in this conversation, he chastises Coleman Hughes, saying, you keep relying on these like hypothetical counterfactuals that are unprovable because, we don't live in that world. And yet here, that's the first thing he leans on.
He is
Is he-
making that.
He's making a
argument.
hypothetical counterfactual that no one could ever prove. We say,
Right.
well, if there wasn't military spending, then prices of everything would have dropped, which, okay, you can't actually show that or prove that.
Well, I mean, I would bring in the economies of scale, obviously. If you're getting some sort of military contract, obviously you're going to get enough purchasing power that you're going to have some economies of scale going on, where you might not actually, some things are not even viable to make in the private sector or for private consumption because they're just not going to be used enough.
I think the main intuition here is that when people are happy with their financial situation,
Mm-hmm.
or even their just situation in life, then they will be inclined, they'll be vibe oriented to say, okay, whatever the economy is, whatever our system is good because it's working for them.
Right.
And if it's not working for them, if people are not in a good place financially and are not in a good place economically or even socially, then they're going to automatically say, well, obviously, I'm going to side with the argument that says that the economy is corrupt or bad, or the economic philosophy behind the economy or society is corrupt and bad because it's not working for them in that moment.
Right. Let's get back to Dave Smith economics here.
theory that war spending, drives the debt. It's a fact. They're spending
then-
trillions and trillions of dollars, and this is all being added to the national debt.
How important can that fact be if America, with all of its excess, massive military spending compared to, say, Europe, has the same long-run inflation rates as all these European countries and pretty much the same debt to GDP ratio? It doesn't, it's not a one-to-one correlation. Obviously, all of these economies are complicated, but it does undermine the idea that the military is the difference between Western Europe spending 1.5 of GDP on their military and America spending 4% of GDP on our military is showing up at the grocery store in any way that a person could actually detect.
No, again, that's just not right. I mean, it's not the case that like if you're getting drunk and getting behind the wheel of your car and you go, oh, but my neighbor's shooting up heroin and getting behind the wheel of his car, and it seems like we have the same outcome.
Why do we have the same long-run inflation rates as all these European countries that don't have empires?
Typically speaking, they've embraced.
That was a terrible hypothetical or analogy. Yeah, that was a terrible analogy completely. Because like, well, no, you're saying if we do X action and we'll have Y outcome, we're doing the outcome, or we're doing the action, and yet we have the same outcome as all the people not doing the action. So therefore, the correlation you're trying to create here doesn't seem
exist.
To be.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem to actually be correlative.
More generous welfare states than we have. They have big government of a different variety, and that also requires money printing. And we also kind of act, at least to some degree, in uniform. I mean, the central banks of Europe and the United States of America do, coordinate quite a bit together. But yes, you're right. It is absolutely the case that America has embraced more of the militaristic big government, whereas the European countries have embraced more
and even in the case of America, our spending is, 1 part military, 3, 4, 5 part welfare states. So
100%.
So it's, okay,
yeah, they're all huge drivers of this. But like, look, and I'm as against the welfare state as anybody you've ever talked to, Coleman. Like, I can assure you that. But there is a difference between paying for grandma's hip surgery.
Like, we could reduce military spending to 0 tomorrow, and we would still every year be increasing the debt to GDP ratio in this country. So to me, the idea of focusing on it is like a firefly to the sun if we're talking about issues like in inflation and the debt.
No, I mean, look, it's not a firefly to the sun. I mean, yes.
I'm exaggerating slightly.
No, but not even slightly. No, it is.
To the sun.
I mean, it's kind of like a third of the sun to the sun. So yes, there are other sections that the entitlement programs are slightly bigger, but that's it. After that, it's I guess interest on the debt now might be overtaking it, but then it's the military.
It annoys me because every time someone has this conversation, it's like someone saying, if you say, okay, Sitch, I want to start a business. I'm going to open a restaurant. And you say, okay, I'm going to put down $1 million. I'm going to spend $1 million. Okay. I'm going to spend $1 million to buy the property, to buy the location, to hire the initial staff, to buy all the food, all the silverware, all the things, right? And I were to look at you and say, I can't believe, Adam, that you just took $1 million and you just evaporated it. Okay. That's so irresponsible of you. And
evaporated all your money?
Yeah, you just took $1 million and evaporated it. When it's like, well, wait a minute. Why? You're only focusing on what was spent. You're not focusing on what was gained. If you spent $1 million to open a restaurant and then you make $2 million, that's a pretty good investment.
Yeah, of course.
And so whenever it comes to this military spending or any of the spending the government does, no one ever looks at, they never say, well, what was the gain? Yes, the government spent X amount of dollars.
How many houses did those soldiers buy?
Right. What was the gain on the economy for that?
Yeah, exactly. How many breakfasts at Denny's did they buy?
Right. We've spent something like $20 trillion since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that's a huge driver of the $37 trillion. But you are absolutely right that with the
it sounds huge when you don't include the biggest GDP in the world in the denominator.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a lot of money for the government to be spending, which is currently $37 trillion in debt. It's not the GDP isn't spending money on defense, right? It's not. It's the government spending this, and they do not bring in enough money. The spending numbers
only have meaning in comparison to the denominator.
No, I don't know if I
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so do you want to move off it?
That was so interesting. Did you see that? Desmond says he at first is saying that's not true, but then he stops and he just kind of gives the eyebrows like, okay, maybe.
He gives up.
Because obviously that's true. That's what Coleman Hughes just said what I said. He's like, you have to, how much are we gaining? If we're spending X amount on our military and that's improving our overall, wealth overall to more than what the cost is, then that's a good thing. That's beneficial.
Hell yeah, it is. That's the difference between investing and consuming. Hi! You just listened to a clip from the Sitch Adam show. Most of the time we stream Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, and we stream during the week. Come join us. You guys are going to love it. It'll be great.